For the Teisho today, day 1 of this October 2006 2-day session, we're going to look at some basic points about Dharma practice. There are quite a few beginners in this session, and it seemed like a good opportunity to review some basics, but this is by no means only for beginners. It's often people who've been practicing for 20, 30 years, 10 years, 5 years. When you feel frustrated, when you feel stuck, facing obstructions, it can be because of mistaken notions about what practice is. So it can be really helpful sometimes to go back to basics and just review a few points. It can help to bring the practice back to life and to help us to rediscover our beginner's mind, which is so valued in Zen. So first I'd like to just review some points about, practical points about the practice, and then move on to looking a little bit at some of the things that are behind what we do. So almost everybody here is either doing a breath practice or working on a koan. Common to both of these is the importance of a good posture. And there are 3 elements to this, 3 main elements. The first one is stability. It's necessary to find a way to sit in which we feel really stable and settled. And the most essential part of this is having 3 points of contact with the mat or the floor. Now, if you're sitting on a mat, it's going to be your seat and your 2 knees. If you're sitting in a chair, your seat and your feet. If we have less than 3 points of contact, we're wobbly. So we've got to find a way to sit where we can really just release into our posture. We're not trying to hold it all together, but we're being held up by the floor, by the earth. It's partly a matter of being earthed and grounded. So that's number 1. The second point is uprightness. Two things come out of this uprightness. One is ease of sitting. When we're lined up correctly, then we will not be creating unnecessary tensions in the body. And also that when we're upright, we can find clarity of mind more easily. Of course, we can practice in any posture, but it's easiest when we're upright. It's much more challenging. It's not impossible, but it's much more challenging to practice, for instance, when we're lying down or when we're bent over. To find this alignment, correct alignment, we need to have our knees lower than our hips. It may only need to be a very little bit, but they do need to be lower. Then the pelvis is at the right angle, and sitting up straight is virtually effortless. So that's a prerequisite for really sitting up straight. And then we need to find the right alignment of our head and spine. We say, for shorthand, we say you've got to have a straight back. But it's important to understand that this is not ramrod straight, but there's a gentle S-curve in the spine. That's the natural alignment of the spine, more like the stalk of some flower rather than a stake. It's got to have some softness in it. And that really leads into the final point of posture, which is balance. This balance involves both symmetry, in other words, to be balanced in terms of the way we sit. If we were to take a line down through the middle of the body, but also it means balance of tension and relaxation. There's got to be both being too relaxed and being too tense. Both of these actually set up tensions in the body. Sometimes the word that's used is tautness. The best image for this is that of a stringed instrument. If the strings are too tight, you don't get any sound. And similarly, if they're too loose, just has to be just right. Not too tight, not too loose. And this very much relates to this gentle curve that there is in the spine. It creates the poise that we need in order to be fully present and responsive. And then, as well as these three basic points, we need to have our hands at rest. So that means supporting them if necessary, so that we don't have unnecessary tension in the shoulders, and having them up against your lower abdomen. This is very important. So they shouldn't be out from the body. Really what you're trying to do in practice is concentrate the mind, and so the body also needs to be concentrated. In other words, it needs to be all of one piece. So the little fingers should be touching your lower abdomen so that everything's connected. The thumbs lightly touching, the hands forming a slightly flattened circle. And all this attention to the posture is for the purpose of sitting still. We may not be able to get all of it right. It can take years to find a really easeful and balanced posture. But before we get to that point, we do have to learn how to sit still, because it's through the sitting still that we can begin to settle the mind. And this is really what is the first step in practice, is learning to settle. Those of you who are working on a breath practice are then either counting your inhalations and exhalations, or just being aware of the inhalation and counting on the exhalation, both of these up to 10 and then going back to 1, or you may be not using the numbers anymore and just becoming one with the breath. In all of these, the most important thing is to recognize is that we're not trying to control our breathing in any way. In fact, we don't need to be concerned about how it feels. Just become one with the breath, however it is. You can't do it wrongly. Often when it doesn't feel so great, we imagine that we must be doing something wrong. But there really isn't any such thing as doing it wrong. as long as we're bringing our full attention to it, or as much attention as we can. And when we notice that our mind is not on the breath, then we gently bring it back. And this point, gently, is so important. Somebody once likened the way that we hold our practice to the way you have to hold a wet bar of soap. If you hold it too tightly, it shoots out of your hand. So we have to find this way of being gentle with our holding of the breath or the koan. Another analogy for the way that we work with the practice is the way you hold a baby. If you hold a baby too tightly, you smother it. If you hold it too lightly, it could drop. You could drop it, hurt it. And this analogy is particularly good because it points to the nature of our relationship with the practice, which is to take care, to nurture it, to become intimate with it. That's how a mother will take care of a baby. She doesn't hold her baby out at arm's length and try to figure out what it needs. She holds it close. And in that holding close, what's going on becomes apparent. So it's a matter of going lightly. Lightly but firmly. One teacher describes the way that we concentrate on the breath as touching the breath. You're not strangling the breath, you're not wrestling it to the floor, but touching it. Actually, the breath is touching you. Each time you inhale, each time you exhale. You need to have this experience of the breath at the center of your attention. That doesn't mean you won't hear sounds or feel things on your skin or see changes in the light. All of that is fine, but at the center of all of that is the breath. Actually, all of that other stuff depends on the breath. If you weren't breathing, you wouldn't be in a position to see, hear, feel, taste, touch, or think. So we have our center of gravity in the breath. And if you can, to have that center of gravity located in the lower abdomen, or the tanden, the hara, which goes all the way around this lower part of the body, not just in the front. So really your center of attention ideally is inside that area. And as the mind settles, you'll find that you can be more and more aware of all the aspects, all the phases of the breath. Those of you working on a koan, most of you are working on mu, or who, or what is it. These shorthand forms, especially mu, is what you work on. This is called the nub. So you put all your inquiry into this distillation of the koan, or into the who, or into what is it. And when you're sitting motionless, you can coordinate that inquiry with the breath, with the inhalations and the exhalations. And then when you're in motion, you can unite the question with whatever activity you're engaged in. And as with the breath, you just come back cleanly whenever you're aware of your mind wandering, you just come back cleanly. Again, treat the wanderings lightly. It's natural for the mind to wander off. It's what the mind does. The key is not to linger in those wanderings or to judge them, but to just flow back to mu, to who, to what is it. It's this moment of coming back, this moment of return, that is the most important moment in the cycles that we go through in our practice. Because every time that we come back to the practice, we're loosening the grip of habit. We're loosening and dissolving the power that our delusions have over us. We're actually creating new neural pathways when we do this. So it doesn't matter, it really doesn't matter how many times you get pulled away from the practice. 100, 200, 300, 1,000 times in the space of a sitting. Fine. Every time you get pulled away, it's an opportunity to come back. It's an opportunity to cut those threads that bind us to our delusions. We're not trying to stop our thoughts when we practice. That's absolutely a futile exercise. The more we try and stop the thoughts, the more they will come, because by trying to stop them, we're giving them attention. What we're doing in practice is we're deflecting our attention from the thoughts and onto the breath or the koan. It's very akin to what people are doing in Aikido and other martial arts. The whole point is to use your opponent's energy to get him off balance and onto the floor. It's exactly the same in our zazen. We use the energy of our unruly mind and divert it, channel it into the practice. You only have one mind. Just as we will tend to divide the world around us into self and other, me and them, we do exactly the same thing inside. We divide our mind into concentrated mind and distracted mind. Divide ourselves into good Zen student and hopeless Zen student, into the koan and not working on the koan. All of that is just generated by the discursive mind. Just concepts. There is only one mind. And that's our job, is to step back to that basic nature of the mind, which is one. To keep shifting back to that, to reaffirming that through giving ourselves to the practice. So those are the nuts and bolts of what we're doing when we sit. Now I'd like to turn to a teaching that comes out of Vajrayana Buddhism. It's Atisha's 7-point mind training, also known as Lojong. Now Atisha was an Indian Buddhist sage who brought this particular teaching from India to Tibet 1,000 years ago, right at the beginning of the previous millennium. Just to put him into a Zen perspective, he's pretty much a contemporary of Secho, of the Song dynasty. Secho was the first compiler of the Blue Cliff Record. And I'll be reading and drawing on a book called Buddhism with an Attitude by B. Alan Wallace. And this title, Buddhism with an Attitude, comes out of the fact that you could see these teachings as a kind of attitudinal training, a way of resetting our minds in alignment with the Dharma. And the first of these 7 points is called the preliminaries. And that's what we're going to be looking into today and tomorrow. These preliminaries are things that it's helpful to understand at the beginning. It's about seeing clearly what it is that we're doing when we practice. What are we doing? What are we trying to do when we practice the Dharma? What is the Dharma that we are practicing, that we take refuge in each day when we chant the refuges? One way of seeing the Dharma is as the truth, things as they are. It's a cosmic law, the law of the universe. It's the Dharma. But it's specifically those truths that lead to awakening. What it is that leads us to genuine happiness. That is a happiness which isn't dependent on conditions. Because most of the time, that's the kind of happiness that we're seeking. We go after certain conditions that we think will bring us happiness. But that kind of seeking is doomed to failure because we can't rely on conditions being a certain way. They keep changing. So the Dharma is really anything that is truly conducive to well-being, ours and other people's. It can't be well-being, our well-being at the expense of others. So that just sets up problems later on. And from this perspective, it's clear that the Dharma isn't confined to Buddhism. And just as it's not confined to Buddhism, it's not confined to a certain form. You can practice the Dharma in any posture, you can practice it in any state of mind. You can do it when you're sick. when you're tired, when you're distracted, depressed, happy, anxious. You can practice it when you're dying. When we begin to realize this, when we begin to discover this, that it really can be practiced anytime, anywhere, no matter how we feel, then we begin to see that practice is not a means to an end. And it's an end in itself. It's simply about aligning ourselves with the truth of this moment, the bare truth. Everything added on, disregarded. Everything unnecessary, let go of. And when we practice this way, when we practice the Dharma as an end in itself, it's immediately satisfying. Because we're not waiting for some outcome. Simply to be present is the Dharma. It has nothing to do with delayed gratification. On the other hand, if we are practicing with the notion of it as a means to a certain end, then we won't be satisfied. We'll be stuck in dukkha, in unsatisfactoriness. So these preliminaries that Atisha goes into, you could say they're antidotes to this kind of unconscious assumption that we tend to make about practice. They're a way of sort of checking where we're heading and making sure that we're going in the right direction. Our disappointments in our practice, in our life, come out of our expectations and our assumptions about how things should be. As long as we're trying to get out of practice things it was never going to give us, then it will be unsatisfactory. We'll get caught up in all kinds of resentments, anger, stuckness. So understanding what we're doing when we practice can be enormously helpful. You say it's a way of avoiding wasting a lot of time going in the wrong direction. Understanding these preliminaries is a little bit like building a good foundation for your building. If your building doesn't have a good foundation, everything else is shaky. And you're going to be just forever fixing things, adjusting things, trying to make it all stable, and it won't be. When we understand these preliminaries, then we can practice genuinely rather than practice something that looks like the Dharma but isn't really. Because if there's one thing that we can be sure of, is that the ego will try and misuse our practice. The ego will take anything it can and try to turn it to its own devices, to its own uses. So we need to get our priorities straight and to really get in touch with our highest aspirations. There are 4 points that are then discussed within this first point. These are called the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. The one we're going to look at this morning is as follows. The rare and precious human life of leisure and opportunity. This is the first thought that turns our mind. And this turning of the mind is really referring to turning our mind toward the Dharma. When the Buddha came to his great awakening, he talked about how our minds were turned upside down. It's like we have everything back to front. So we're looking at our world through a mirror. So it looks very, very like the real world, but it's back to front. So these points are ways of beginning that process of turning everything inside out, beginning to see it more clearly, this world we live in. So there's a lot in this statement, and we'll just look into some points now, reading from this book by Alan Wallace, Buddhism with an Attitude. In the line, precious human life of leisure and opportunity, leisure means time. Some people live in situations in which there is no leisure, in which every breath is committed to finding food, keeping warm, or dodging bombshells. If you live in an area of pestilence, famine, or war, you have no leisure. Leisure means having time to breathe the present, and it makes it possible to drench the heart and mind in Dharma. Leisure is an empty vessel that can be filled with the nectar of Dharma. The fact that all of us have managed to come here for this weekend is evidence that we are blessed with leisure. We may think our lives are just so busy, so crammed full, so stressful. But there is space there. To have a weekend like this is such an opportunity. Leisure is one of the greatest benefits of civilization. Without civilization, life is absorbed with growing, killing, or protecting the next meal. With civilization, we can arrange time off, vacations, weekends, a lunch break. We can decide how to use leisure. We can decide how to use leisure. That means in Sesshin, that means each moment deciding how to use our time. To summon up the energy for the practice. Unfortunately, in our culture, leisure time is often devoted to catching up, getting ahead, or battery recharging for a return to work. We have this weird phrase that leisure time is time to kill. We need to work and we need to sleep, but the critical point here is that leisure should not just be a way to revitalize after a hard day at work. Using leisure time beneficially within a workaholic ethic requires shifting our priorities. This means gradually having work support spiritual practice and ensuring that spiritual practice does not become a tool for improving work performance. We do have a degree of choice about what we do with our time. And when we really commit to awakening, we find that we can make choices that enable us to practice. And this doesn't just mean deciding to spend our weekends or a week in Sesshin. It also means deciding to spend moments throughout our day coming back to the present. Recognizing that there are, throughout our day, there are all these moments in which we can bring the Dharma to mind, which means just to be returning to the practice. One of the benefits of Sesshin is through this more intensive practice, we can begin to see what's possible, what is achievable in the mind. And then we can practice with more faith and application outside of intensive practice. Opportunity is the second quality of this precious human life. Tibetans have a list of 10 kinds of opportunities that focus on the ability, desire, open-mindedness, and faith to engage in spiritual practice. Everybody here, everybody in this room has, to one degree or another, the ability, desire, open-mindedness, and faith to engage in this practice. Opportunity also includes finding the appropriate circumstances for practice, including a spiritual tradition that is compatible with your aspiration and temperament. To find a spiritual tradition in which you can be supported. To have it where you live. A center like this is just the most wonderful opportunity. Not to be wasted, but to be cherished. To be nurtured, upheld. The benefits of Dharma arise from leisure and opportunity, the fortuitous combination of ability and circumstances. The coming together of these factors at any time in any human life is rare. These factors are precious because they are what is necessary to obtain the jewel of life, genuine happiness, awakening, the results of successful spiritual practice. As soon as we have a practice and a community to practice in, reasonably good health, sound mind, as soon as we have these elements, we have everything necessary for awakening. Nothing more needs to be added. In actual fact, all that has to happen is we need to drop a few things, drop a few delusions. It's all here. It's all here right now at this moment in this room. Spiritual practice is not a shortcut to the American dream, nor is it an embellishment to a comfortable life. Dharma addresses the root causes of suffering and requires that we take a hard look at the preconceptions that maintain our worldview and perpetuate our problems. As much as success seems to be the source of the good things in life, happiness included, success isn't the goal of spiritual practice. Our ideas about success are themselves based on preconceptions and are also part of a self-perpetuating cycle preventing us from achieving the genuine success and happiness that we seek. There's a lot in this paragraph. There's a lot of spiritual practice offered in this country as a kind of lifestyle choice. Something cool that you can furnish your house with. It's not what it's about at all. This Dharma practice is radical. Its aim is to go to the root of our suffering. As long as we remain in the mode of trying to succeed, we'll be frustrated. Actually, if anything, practice is the way of failure. Dogen talked about this, about practice as the willingness to fail over and over and over again. It's in the nature of taking up a practice and attempting to concentrate on it that we fail and fail and fail and fail and fail. The key thing is to keep coming back in spite of all our failures, in spite of all our wandering. The Buddhist tradition addresses preconceptions about success head-on with an 8-term differential diagnosis called the 8 mundane concerns. 8 orientations toward the pursuit of happiness based on unexamined assumptions. Fixation on these concerns subverts our best efforts, leading either to counterfeit success or true frustration. The 8 mundane concerns consist of 4 pairs of priorities: the pursuit of material acquisitions and the avoidance of their loss, the pursuit of stimulus-driven pleasure and the avoidance of discomfort, the pursuit of praise and avoidance of blame, and the pursuit of good reputation and the avoidance of bad reputation. These 8 concerns commonly sum up our motivation for the pursuit of happiness, and this is exactly the problem. The 8 mundane concerns, not wrong in themselves, underlie our motivation, and it is motivation more than any other single factor that determines the outcome of spiritual practice. One of the painful things about really sincerely practicing is that we start to become aware of how much of the time we are caught up in these 8 mundane concerns. And it can be acutely painful to see how much we are thinking about how other people will see us, or obsessing about doing the right thing, and not being told off for something. Obsessing about trying to not face too much pain while we're sitting. Thinking about what we're going to eat. It's amazing how in the sort of pared down world of Sesshin, how big the meals loom as highlights of the day. How wonderful to be free of all this obsessing. To be just moving freely through our lives without any maneuvering, without any posturing. But to do that, we have to be honest about these concerns and how they do rule so much of our lives. He continues, there is nothing bad about having material acquisitions, a car, a house, and conversely, poverty is not necessarily a virtue. There is nothing wrong with enjoying a sunset, a good book, pleasant conversation, or beautiful music. It is not a bad thing to be praised. Being loved and respected by others is not bad either. On the other hand, it is not bad to be rejected by others if you are leading a wholesome and meaningful life. Many accomplished Dharma practitioners are content and happy living in total poverty. Reputation may go up and down, but it is possible for contentment to remain constant. The true source of happiness does not lie in mastery of the 8 mundane concerns. Rich, poor, praised, blamed, stimulated, bored, respected, reviled. None of these mundane concerns are in themselves sources of happiness, nor do they prevent happiness. The problem is that when we focus on mundane concerns as a mean to happiness, life becomes a lottery. There are no guarantees. If you aspire to material wealth, you may not get it. But if you do, there's no guarantee you'll be happy. If you aspire to pleasure, once a stimulus is over, so is satisfaction. There is no lasting happiness in scurrying after praise. People who are respected and famous tend to have the same personal problems as everyone else. That's actually putting it mildly. If you think of Hollywood. The fatal shortcoming of the 8 mundane concerns is that they are counterfeit Dharma, misguided ways of seeking happiness. And by habitually mistaking mundane concerns for genuine Dharma, our efforts to achieve genuine happiness are continually undermined. So the first point of the mind training is to train the preliminaries in order to be able to differentiate between genuine and counterfeit Dharma. If you bank on achieving genuine happiness and fulfillment by finding the perfect mate, getting a great car, having a big house, the best insurance, a fine reputation, the top job, and we could add in here, getting enlightenment, if these are your focus, getting enlightenment, wish also for luck in life's lottery. The objective of the first point is to save time. Don't wait until you are 80 years old to realize the shortcomings of the 8 mundane concerns. Examine your priorities now. There is no need to reject these mundane concerns altogether. What is necessary is to shift our primary investment elsewhere, to genuine Dharma. Once priorities shift, the mundane concerns serve as supports for Dharma practice. Learning to distinguish between the many types of pseudo-success, the many facsimiles of happiness, and genuine happiness saves time and grief in the long run. The goal of genuine Dharma is to achieve genuine happiness. So our time is up. We've just covered the first 2 words of this first point, leisure and opportunity. So we'll continue with this tomorrow. We'll stop here and recite the 4 vows.